Hello again. Today I'm going to talk about Spirits of the Dead, which is the anthology Poe film from the 60s that was not anything to do with the anthology Poe films that Roger Corman made. Even though in the American version, when they bought the American version, they brought in Vincent Price to do a voiceover. Because of course they did. Because it's how we sell a 60s Edgar Allan Poe movie. But this was the idea, was to bring in European directors and do an anthology. And to be honest, I think the Corman stuff is better. The Corman stuff is stronger, generally more interesting. It kind of had its take on what this thing was in a way that this film feels much more like it's trying too hard. Like, there's good stuff, there's bad stuff. The problem with anthology films, I find a lot of the time, is that because I think of different directors doing them, is they're paced individually for each story. So each director has their own story, and there's no pace of, well, this comes first, this comes second, this comes third, and this will build here, build here, build here. The way that in the Poe films, when Roger Corman, he was doing anthologies, he'd be aware this story comes first, this comes second. So let's build it in certain ways to make it easier to watch. This film doesn't have that. They can come in any direction. And the same way that some of Black Sabbath built quite nicely. It was not a Poe film, but it built because they decided Mario Bava directing it. So there's lots of anthology films in the 60s like this. This is one of those ones that go higher at some point and then go way low at another point. So it's kind of a mixed bag, is the best way to put it. So you've got Roger Vadium, you've got Louis Malle, and you've got Fredrico Fellini, all doing their stories, all doing the stories, Poe stories. And I'll read each one, like, first one's called Metzengerstein, then there's William Wilson, then there's Toby Dammit. Now, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that first name again, because it is impossible. You should be trying to do it there. It's terrible. I'm terrible at it. So, that's the Roger Vadium one, and you could argue between which one's strongest between the final two stories. But I think generally, if you watch the film, the general consensus is the worst one is the first one, the Roger Vadium one. It is the weirdest one. It's not without merit, but it's strange, it's weird. I think because Roger Vadium is not a very good director is the problem. He's okay, he's much more into building the worlds, having the costumes right, or right for what he wants, you know. But I don't think he's that good at camera placement and pacing. So, because this film is a pace killer, and this is meant to start instead of starting off a story that really intrigues you. Like, William Wilson would have a much better opening story. But this one just starts slow, and it just, things happen, but because the direction's not very good, or just things happen, you don't have emotional attachment to any of them. You're meant to be horrified by some of the actions early on. You're not horrified because they're not directed well. So it's about Jane Fonda, who's married to Vadim at the time, and she plays this countess who has lots of money, who owns all these castles around this area. She's basically the top level person, one with all the money. She can have orgies all over the place. She has lots of friends who she's paid to be there because she's so much money. She has, she's obviously bisexual, she'll nail anybody, and she obviously likes to intimidate those who are uncomfortable with her views of things. And she has a cousin from a neighbouring family who she hates, who's played by Peter Fonda, her brother, Jane Fonda's brother, who she gets obsessed by, which is really weird, because you know these two are actual real life siblings, and it's like, this is a bit tasteless. But it is interesting. It's tasteless, but it's interesting. It's the most interesting part of the film. So eventually she gets frustrated because her cousin has nothing to do with her. He helps her get out of a trap at one point, but he obviously judges her and her actions, and it does get under her skin. So she bonds, because he's into horses and into his horses, and that's his pride in life. She gets the people to burn down horses' stables just to get back at him. Unfortunately, during this time, he goes in to try and get one of his horses out, and he dies as it happens. And so basically, out of the escaping from that area and coming to her is this black horse, and no one knows where it came from. But it's suggested that it's the reincarnation of this guy as a horse. And she becomes obsessed by this horse, who was once played by the real life actress's brother. You know, it's just weird. But as I talk about it, it sounds far more interesting than it actually is in the film. Because the film is very meandering. It really is. It's like everything you say about it sounds more interesting than the execution. It's got all these costumes that are completely impractical for the time period. You'd be freezing in them. They're just not. They're all stage designed to look gorgeous, but they're completely impractical in there. They're completely not what anyone would wear. And even they don't even work as a suggestion of the person's mindset. It doesn't even work as a style, because it's so much into some weird fetishistic thing that they're doing that it can't even be a suggestion of the subconscious. It's a suggestion of the director's a sicko and he wants to put his wife in all these weird costumes. Even when it's, no matter what the context of the scene is. I've seen Barbarella recently. I'll be covering that probably next week, and it has the same thing. And it's just not very good. The whole film is just it's about her obsession with the horse eventually, and how she throws away all her friends and becomes more obsessed with the horse, and how it's leading her to death as revenge. Which again sounds like it should be good, but the way it's done is so distant from it. You don't feel any obsession. It's just like the worst possible way to do this story is done in this film. It's just so distant from the story. And it's like you don't really feel the horror or anything. You don't really feel the ups and downs of the story. You're just watching this thing play out, and it's like, eh? You know, I mean, the Corman and Poe films were stylized, but they had a stylization that worked for making it into the mindset of the characters. And this one feels most influenced by Corman, but it's almost like what you would not do if you're influenced by Corman. Just take the surface stuff and ignore what's below the surface. So it's not a good start to the film. It really drags the film down. And it kind of makes you think, well, should I go on? But the other two stories are better. The middle story is my favourite of the three, which is William Wilson. And this is by Louis Malle. Now, Louis Malle was not that intrigued by this whole thing. He was probably the least into the idea, I think, you can safely say it. Which is funny because he did the best version of the film. He did the best segment by a mile. He thought one of his lead actresses he did not want in the film, but he was kind of forced to by, he did not want Bridget Bardot to play the female lead in the film, but he was kind of forced to have her there. And it's weird because she's fine. She works fine for the film. It's like, why were you so fed up with this? He apparently did not like Alain Delon as the lead actor, which again is weird because he's really good in the film. And he would have given the best performance in the film if it wasn't for the third section. But he's really good in it. This is how you actually do a Poe story. This is the best way to do a Poe story. And it takes all the good stuff from the common versions, which is it's all about the lead character and their weird psychology. And you just stick with that, and you're inside with them, so you're seeing why they think the way they think. Even if it's irrational, you're seeing what's triggering them and what's going on, and you're giving all the little human details. So it's a doppelganger's tale, but it's the opposite of normal. Normally, a normal doppelganger tale is about a guy who's been haunted by his evil twin or his ambiguous twin. This one is about a bad guy being haunted by his good doppelganger, the good side of his nature. And it's driving him nuts because he's enjoying being a bad guy. So Alan Delon, it starts off as a young version of him at school when he's torturing people and he's just a sadist. He's horrible. He makes people's lives miserable. And then a nurse student called William Wilson, same name as him, comes to school and stops him. They get into a fight and they both are forced to leave. Years later, Wilson decides to become a doctor out of boredom, and he's back to his old tricks of being a sadist, being nasty. And at one point, he gets this woman, kidnaps her, and takes her to this with his doctor friends, and are going to cut her up. Like they've been watching an autopsy being done by the lecturer. They're going to do a human autopsy of a living person, and all the friends are too horrified to see anything. But so they're going to go along with it and be implicated with it before the other Will Wilson shows up and says no. So then Will Wilson moves on, becomes a soldier. And again, he's turning the environment into something horrific. Like, he's making everything corrupt. He's a cheat, a liar. Everyone knows it, but no one can catch him. And it's again about his downfall, and it all comes to him doing a card game with Brigitte Bardot's character, who's a gambler. And of course there's a comeuppance, and he finally has to make peace with his doppelganger, or bring it to a conclusion. And it's wonderfully told. It's irrational in the best way, but also all kind of makes sense eventually. DeLonge's perfect as this guy who has no soul, who's the kind of person you would see, if you see some of this in life, or a person like this in life, he's somebody to avoid. There's just some aura to them. Brilliant. The whole film is really terrific, and it's weird that Mal wasn't that interested because it's so well done. It's a really good adaptation. It's one of the strongest Poe adaptations there is. So, this is really good. This is the reason to watch the film, is the William Wilson thing. It's so well done. It's so clear. Apparently, Mal did not like the torture scene in the middle of the young woman, which is done actually fairly tastefully. But you get the point, and I think the producers were right. You needed it to strike home how evil this guy is, how twisted he is. I think without it, it would be more theoretical. But it stopped before it goes too far, and it really worked. So I think it's a case of there was tensions there, but the tensions were productive, because even though Delon and Mal did not get on, it was a good tension for the film, because the film was really good, really strong. So yeah, that's the best one. William Wilson's the best one. It's one of my favourite Poe adaptations. It's really good. The next one is the weirdest one. It's Toby Dammit by Fellini. Toby Dammit is it's a weird adaptation because it only really brings the last part of the story they adapt. It's about decapitation. That's the only thing they shares with the film. The film's actually this alcoholic actor played by Terence Stamp, who is coming to Rome to star in this exploitation spaghetti western, which which is all about Christ coming back and things like that, and it's a weird Fellini-esque idea. And he's going through the airport, and he's going through this television event while he's drunk, and he's obviously a guy who's past it, and he's obviously a representation of the British Hellraiser from the 60s, like the Richard Harrises, the Richard Burtons, that type of people. The Peter O'Toole, he looks a lot like Peter O'Toole. So a bunch of people that Terence Stamp would have known, and he would have, or at least interacted with over time. Like, that's kind of, because Terence Stamp as an actor was much more distance. Really, he had his troubles, but he was he never gave the same Hellraiser impressions you got from, Richard Burton or Richard Harris. He had a different aura to him. and he's an actor he's come and gone through. He's much more into the 60s peace and love generation. And he's an actor who's come and gone through the mainstream for decades. Like, he appears in some films, then he disappears for a while, then he appears again, disappears. He always just wanders in and out of his career. But he's always been a really good mainstay for filmmaking. He's always been, the interesting directors all want Terence Stamp. So he always comes back. So he was portraying something that was a fast burnout case that he actually wasn't. And Fellini's interested in that kind of phenomena. But he's done it before, 8.5. He's done it before in La Dolce Vita, that kind of burnout case. And it does feel like this is a not as good version as 8.5. Because to be honest, I liked some bits of it, and other bits I was pretty bored by. I mean, two of these films, it's a 2-hour film, and Toby Dammit and the Vadium one both could have been cut down quite substantially and be better films, because they both meander in certain points, because the director likes certain things, not because he's making a point. It's a point where you've got the idea and it's still going on, and it's like, Jesus Christ, but you just get to your ending. So it actually, these two stories do not understand brevity at all. And to be honest, Toby Dammit, if it wasn't for Terence Stamp being so good, I wasn't pretty keen on the style of this one. I felt like Fellini was doing Fellini. He wasn't serving the story, he was doing his shtick. And it was just like, I've seen you do better. La Dolce Vita and 8.5 are so much better than this. This is just meandering. It reminds me a lot of what Terry Gilliam did with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, in the sense that it makes a point and goes on and on and on and on, and it's like, you kind of get a feel that Gilliam was very, very influenced by Fellini and his sense of pacing, and there was quite a detriment to him. And this one I just found to be pretty tedious, but Stamp is so good that every time you cut back to Stamp, whatever he's doing, suddenly he's magnetic again. And then when you cut away to these other actors going over the top, these Italian actors, it's like, oh. Then Stamp, oh, that's great. Oh. And that kind of weird schizo feel throughout. Because it's all about Stamp. And when it goes to these other characters, it's almost like Fellini's throwing an extra little thing, another thing here, another thing there. It's not trying to do the point of the story. And it just becomes this thing. It's like, why do I need to see this? So Tony Dummett's had a mixed blessing. The sense is, you have a director going over the top, but you've got an amazing lead performance by someone who knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows exactly the kind of person he's portraying. He understands exactly what they are. And he's kind of one foot in that industry to know what they are, but he's also one foot out of the industry because he's a different kind of person. So he's a perfect person to portray it. So it's a weird one. But the film itself is interesting. I mean, it's definitely worth seeing for William Wilson and for Toby Dammit for Terence Stamp. The other one, good luck with Vadium 1. Vadium 1 is... Even Jane Fonda's not that great because she's quite young in this one, and you sense that she knows she's in a bit of a shit show. Like, she's in something that's maybe not quite as good as it should be. You know, you get a sense of an actor knowing when they're in something that's not coming together. You get that sense with this one with her, like, this isn't fitting together. There's bits of character pieces missing here. There's scenes that she should have had to make the character work that she's not getting. So that's kind of thing. So you can't really blame her for this one. It's like, it's the director being self-indulgent. But it's still worth seeing, but it is a kind of mixed bag. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it interests you, and you can, especially it is worth watching. Just go with tempered expectations. Okay, well that's me for now. Bye.